Hey, it's Lara. So, part two of Witchy Wednesday for the week of July 3rd to 9th, 2019. And in this part, I will go through each of the signs and I will speak to the Mercury retrograde that's happening through the latter degrees of Leo the early degrees of Leo and the latter degrees of Cancer, and that's beginning on the 7th, although we're in the shadow phase right now, and also to Chiron retrograding in Aries. So, which is beginning on the 8th after Mercury goes retrograde. I'm going to start by saying you really should, maybe I shouldn't use the word should, but I encourage you to listen to part one, okay? Because in part one, it gives you all the context in that intro part. And so if you just skip to watching part two and you're just watching for your sign or your rising sign, you're not going to get the full experience. You're not going to really get as much meaning and as much guidance from me just speaking to what house this is happening in for you. It's really helps to have the overall context. And so I encourage you to go watch part one of the video before you watch for your sign. And you can listen, of course, for your, first and foremost, your rising sign or your ascendant, right? And also your sun sign and your moon sign. And these will give you added layers of information. But when we're talking about a general forecast, the rising sign tends to be really what people resonate with on a more kind of practical outer worldly level. So, and that's because it's more accurate in a general forecast. So we have just in case you make the choice to not listen to the intro, and of course, it's your choice. I did a whole spiel on free will in the first video, in the first part of this week's video. And, in case you choose not to do that, I'll just give you the Coles notes of what I'm speaking to right here. And that's Mercury retrograding at about between 4 and 5 degrees Leo, happening on the 7th, currently in the shadow phase, though, like I said. Then Mercury will move back into Cancer around July 19th, 20th, and it will move all the way back to the 23rd degree of Cancer, and then start moving forward again and re-enter Leo on August 11th, 12th. And then it will be right out of its shadow in mid-August, right? So the territory that it will move on to new ground after that. And then Chiron is beginning to retrograde on the 8th, stationing retrograde on the 8th. And that's in the sign of Aries, where Chiron is for the next while still. And I did do 2 separate videos on Chiron on my channel a while back. One just on Chiron in general, and then one on Chiron's transit through Aries, which I encourage you to have a listen to at your leisure. They're in a file marked, I think, special astrology videos. But Chiron's retrograding at around 5 to 6 degrees of Aries, and then it will move all the way back to the 1st degree and station direct on December 12th. And then it will exit that area of the chart completely in not until April 2020. So this is a longer term transit than the Mercury retrograde, right? So Mercury retrograde will speak to like the next sort of several weeks to a month. And then the Chiron retrograde will speak to the longer haul of, it will take us into 2020 and through to the spring. So I spoke about, what particular degrees and signs will be impacted and that kind of thing in the intro video. So I'm not going to repeat myself here as far as that goes. I'm just going to jump in and I'm going to speak to each sign. I'll address the area that the Mercury retrograde's happening in for you. So the 2 houses that it will visit, and then the Chiron retrograde, right? And just before I do that, when we're talking about the Mercury retrograde, this is about any kind of retrograde, as I said in the intro, is about moving inward, reflecting, reviewing, revisiting, recalibrating, the themes that surround that planet. In the case of Mercury, that's our messages, our communications, our thoughts, and ideas. And this includes our self-talk as well, right? Anything Mercury related. And it's asking us, because Mercury is this planet that moves quite quickly, it's asking us to slow down, to make sure that we are, our messages are getting out there in the way that we intend, and that we are receiving messages in the way that is intended. That we review perhaps our thought processes. It can bring back like old communications in some way that have already happened. Those can resurface around this time. It just really wants us to slow down, right? And with Chiron retrograding, that is drawing our attention to the healing, specifically the healing of our identity. That's Chiron in Aries, in whatever area of the chart that Chiron sits for us. And it will be revisiting ground that it already covered during the retrograde. So it's on this healing journey, right, of Chiron through Aries, and whatever house Aries sits for us, and I'll speak to that. But as it retrogrades, it's going back and going, okay, so we've looked at this, we've done some healing here, these themes have come up, but there's some unfinished business. We want to take it down to the next layer. And so some wounding, some past wounding may come up again to be revisited and to be reflected on, and really sort of dealt with and cleaned up, before Chiron moves on to new territory in next spring. And so that's what's happening in general. And then the houses that it's happening in for you, I'm going to get to right now. So I'm going to start with Leo. Just excuse me here. Because Mercury is retrograding through your first house initially, right? Because it's in your sign. And so this is happening until around July 19th, 20th, when it will move back into your 12th house, which is Cancer. So Mercury's asking you to reflect, to review, to revisit, to reconsider your communications, your thoughts, your perceptions, excuse me, messages, those sorts of things that have to do with the self, right? You as an individual, that's the first house. So how you put yourself out there, your instinctual approach to the world, your physical appearance, even your physical vitality has to do with the first house. And so Mercury's asking you to revisit this area and make sure that you have your ducks in a row, and that things are as they should be, and that communications are, being are clear and articulate, and all of those sorts of things in relation to that first house. And it can be like reconsidering or thinking about, for example, your physical vitality. Like, are you low on energy, and maybe why is that happening, right? Like, review, reflect, revisit that area. And then Mercury will move into your 12th house of the subconscious, right? Or the unconscious, the unseen, things that go on behind closed doors, how you spend time in rest and reflection and recuperation and solitude, places of healing and solitude and recuperation, and those kinds of things as well. And so there may be themes that resurface in those life areas at this time that are asking for your attention and asking for your clear communication and perception of those things when Mercury is retrograde. Just make sure that you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and you're not rushing headlong into something in those areas, right? While Mercury is retrograde. And then Chiron is retrograding in your 9th house. So Chiron is making the long haul through the 9th house for you, which has to do with higher learning, anything that happens sort of beyond high school, and so that can be like formal education in terms of college, university, that sort of thing, but it can also be other kinds of learning that is beyond that. So any kind of courses, learning, teaching, studying that you do, and it can have to do with what you learn and absorb from foreign cultures, and that can include long distance travel, can even include armchair travel, and things that you learn through watching documentaries and reading books and that kind of thing. And also it has to do with like what shapes and our general philosophy and our belief system, right? And those things like has to do with those things. And so Chiron is there healing your identity in relation to all of that in some way over the next 7 years still, Leo. But as it's retrograding, it's revisiting some ground that's already been touched on, and what is left to still be healed, that maybe like we want to take it to the next level in terms of those areas. And what themes are resurfacing because we're not quite done with them, and the healing process that needs to happen. And remember, when we say healing, like that happens on so many levels, right? It can be about physical healing, it can be the healing of our belief system, in this case in the ninth house. It can be healing that happens through foreign people, foreign cultures, healing that happens through traveling. The healing can happen on a very internal, deep level. It can be, it's a word that encompasses our whole being, really. So keep that in mind. All right, Leo, and I'm going to move on to Virgo now, where we've got Mercury retrograding initially in your 12th house and then in your 11th. And then Chiron in the 8th. So starting with the Mercury retro in your 12th, Mercury is asking you to slow down, to reflect, to review, to revisit your subconscious and perhaps unconscious patterns and behaviors, and even things that are self-sabotaging, you on some level. That you may not recognize. Mercury may bring some messages from the depths in relation to these things. There may be messages coming through in your dreams. That's 12th house. From sort of the other side, so to speak, right? Messages, spiritual messages coming through. Maybe some reflection, some review, some revisiting of things that have to do with solitude, rest, reflection, recuperation, recovery, even that have to do with institutions, like institutions that are hidden away from the world, in a way, like hospitals, ashrams, prisons, retreat centers, rehabilitation facilities, hospice, these kinds of things. So there may be some things that are asking for your attention to detail there, and to reflect and review and revisit those things, and themes that are being revisited. It's not, when Mercury retrogrades, usually old things come up. It's not something new that generally transpires, right? It's a reflection or a review or a revisiting. So that's happening for you in the 12th and then the 11th house, Virgo. And then Chiron, is retrograding through your 8th house of intimacy and vulnerability. That's really the 8th house. The 8th house is hard to articulate sometimes, but ultimately it's really about where we are vulnerable, where we feel vulnerable. Our most intimate connections, our shared resources, any money that comes to us through outside sources or that we share, whether that be loans, taxes, credit cards, debt, insurance, wills, inheritance, all of that, bursaries, all of that. And also anything that's sort of buried deep down there that we don't necessarily always like to bring out into the light. So deep psychological healing. So this is really kind of a profound transit of Chiron through Aries. You're healing your identity in relation to these matters over the long haul, Virgo. But as Chiron retrogrades through that area, it's revisiting themes that have already been brought up, but that need some more attention, that need you to take it down to the next layer, that need further healing. And so again, when a planet retrogrades, it doesn't bring about new things. It's things that we need to pay more attention to, that we're familiar with, but we haven't fully we haven't visited the full scope of whatever that is, right? So that's what's going on for you, Virgo. Then moving on to Libra now, we've got Mercury initially retrograding through your 11th and then your 10th. And then Chiron sitting in the 7th for you. So starting with the Mercury retrograde, Mercury is asking you to slow down, to revisit, review, rethink, revise, recalibrate things that have to do with your connections, your networks, your friendship groups, your organizations, clubs, associations, online. This can also have to do with online connections, your hopes and dreams for the future, and the folks that can help you attain those. That's 11th house as well. And so there's some review and some reflection going on here. Maybe themes from the past are coming up for review. People, friendships from the past, friendship groups, issues with friendship groups, communication related issues, with friendship groups can be bubbling up right now to be further reviewed, and to take some time to reflect on those things and to get your ducks in a row there. And then later in July, around the 19th, 20th, Mercury will move into your 10th house of your career, your public reputation, your aspirations, your relationship to authority, and your, the legacy, the public legacy that you wish to leave. And so some review and some reflection and some revisiting of old themes there, as possibility for you at that time, Libra. And Mercury's just saying, slow down, make sure that you are communicating clearly, messages aren't getting lost in translation, you are receiving the communications that you need to be, just generally a slow down and a reflection and a review of that 10th house area. And then particularly as it relates to, thoughts, perceptions, communications, ideas, this sort of thing, messages, right? And then Chiron is transiting your 7th house. So Chiron through Aries in the 7th is a healing of the identity in relation to your one-to-one connections, your one-to-one close relationships. And so that's happening over the long haul right now of like 7 years. But it's, as it retrogrades, it's revisiting an area, some ground, some issues that have already come up. It's not something new. It's something that's already come up, but that needs to be reviewed, reflected on, that needs to be further healed when we're talking about Chiron, right? So some past wounding may resurface, and you may go, oh, thought we dealt with that, and perhaps we didn't, and we need to, take it to the next level in terms of the healing of that, whatever that situation is for you, Libra. So we're going to move on now to talk to Scorpio. And Scorpio, we've got Mercury retrograding through your 10th and 9th houses, and then Chiron in the 6th. So Mercury retrograding through the 10th until around July 20th is bringing up themes of career, public reputation, your public legacy, your relationship to authority, your aspirations, these kinds of things, right? So asking for your attention there and saying, Are you communicating clearly? Do certain communications need to be reviewed, reflected on, revisited here? You know, some career related matters may resurface, just to be reviewed or, taken to the next level. And so your attention is required there. And then around the 20th of July, Mercury will retrograde into your ninth house, where you may have a revisitation of themes surrounding travel, foreign cultures, foreign people at a distance, your philosophy and belief system, what shapes your worldview, teaching, learning, those kinds of things, publishing. And so some reflection and some slowing down and some making sure that you've got your ducks in a row there is being asked of you at that time, Scorpio. And then a longer term transit is Chiron moving through the sixth house, right? Chiron healing your identity in relation to your daily grind, to your daily affairs, to your health and wellness routines, to your self-development, to your relationships between people that are not on equal playing field. So these are all themes that can come up for you, Scorpio. And these are not new things, right? These are things that have already been brought to light, brought to the surface. But now you're asked to revisit those areas in relation to what still needs to be healed and uncovered there. Chiron's, going into the depths saying, okay, we've been through this, traveled this ground, but now we have to go back and pick up any things we've left behind and clean up the wound so that it can properly heal here. And so that's what's going on for you, Scorpio. Issues relating to, as I said, your health and wellness routines and your daily grind largely. So things that need to be revisited and healed there in that area of life. So moving on to Sagittarius, we have Mercury retrograding through your ninth house and then your eighth. So the ninth house, Sagittarius, has to do with your philosophy and belief system and worldview and, the way you think about the world. And it has to do with higher learning. So those things you learn outside of basic education, right? Of like your basic elementary, high school education. So anything outside of that. It has to do with long distance travel. It has to do with foreign cultures and the things that you learn from people at a distance. And so some kind of review, reflection, revisitation of these things is coming up for you right now. And you need to kind of slow down and consider what still needs to be reflected on there, right? Your perceptions surrounding these things, even ideas, thoughts, messages, right? Those are all mercurial related things. And when any planet goes retrograde, it's not something new that comes up. These are things that you're familiar with, things that may have already happened in the past, but it's kind of taking it to that next level or the next, asking you to review it again, to go back and to make sure everything's as it should be there. And then Sag, around July 19th, 20th, we've got Mercury moving into your eighth house. So where you'll some revisitation of communications, ideas, thoughts, perceptions, messages, these sorts of things wants to happen in your area of life that has to do with, where you're vulnerable, your intimate relationships, that cycle of transformation, that those deep psychological healing processes and your shared resources, right? So it may have to do some review of the taxes, of the insurance, of loans, debts, scholarships, these kinds of things. It's a time to cross your T's and dot your I's in relation to those things and to not move too quickly there. And then Chiron is retrograding in your 5th house of children and your individual creative output, creative self-expression, what sparks joy for you, right? How you have fun. And children, when I say children, it's your children or children you're associated with, work with, that kind of thing, or your inner child. And so all these themes are coming up for you in relation to healing your identity, surrounding those 5th house themes. So that's the long haul of Chiron's transit there. But as Chiron retrogrades, it's revisiting some ground that's already been covered there and going back and going, okay, we still have some healing to do here. Maybe you thought you were finished with these things, but not quite. We need to go back and clean some things up and do a bit of mopping up. And, so things may surface from the past that are ultimately not there to irritate you, but there to be looked at and reviewed and ultimately healed in that 5th house area. Okay, Sag? So that's what's going on for you. And we're going to move on to Capricorn, because Capricorn, we've got Mercury retrograding in your 8th and then your 7th, and Chiron in the 4th. So Mercury starting as retrograde in the area of your chart that has to do with intimacy, with vulnerability, with the resources that you share with others, money that comes to you outside, or money that comes to you or goes outside of what you earn from your job, kind of thing, or your skills and talents, right? So loans, credit card debt, insurance, scholarships, taxes, wills, inheritance, all of these things. Business, money that comes through a business partnership, that sort of thing. Okay, Capricorn. And then in July, around the 20th, Mercury will retro to your 7th house of one-to-one relationships and ask you to make sure that your ducks are in a row there, and you slow down the communications to make sure that you're being understood and that you're understanding the other person, and things aren't getting lost in translation. So thoughts, perceptions, ideas, messages, mercurial themes, being asked, those are asking for your attention in relation to those 8th and 7th house matters over the next month or so. And then Chiron transiting through your 4th house of home, family, relationship to mother or women in your life, nurturing your emotional security, your ancestry, your place of living, homeland, these sorts of things. And so Chiron is there over the long haul, like the next 7 years still, and will be there, healing that area of the chart for you of your life. But as it's retrograding over these next many months, it's going over ground that's already been visited. It's not new issues that will come up. It's things that from the past that will come up for revisiting and for taking to the next level of healing in that 4th area for you. I'm not going to give specific examples in this video because it's just going to get too long. But, if you reflect on that 4th house in your own life, you will no doubt have a sense of what this means for you. Okay, Capricorn? Okay, moving on to Aquarius now. Aquarius, we have Mercury retrograding through your 7th house and then your 6th house. So Mercury is asking you to review, to reflect on, to revise, to revisit, to recalibrate, reconsider communications, thought processes, perceptions, ideas in relation to your one-to-one relationships, right? So any close personal relationships that you have. How are the communications going there? Slow down. Make sure you're on the same page. Revisit these things and maybe some issues surrounding communications, thoughts, ideas, perceptions may resurface for you at this time. And it won't be something new. It'll be something you've dealt with before that comes back around for reconsideration now, Aquarius. And then later in July, around the 19th, 20th, Mercury will retro into your 6th house of your daily grind, your health and wellness routines, your self-development efforts, those kinds of things. And you'll get a chance to revisit that and see what needs reflecting on, reviewing, revisiting, refinishing, revising, all of those things, right? What messages are coming up from internal sources, sort of thing, saying, okay, this needs to be looked at, and again, it will be themes that you're familiar with, but that need to be reviewed at this time. So, slow down and do that for yourself, Aquarius. And then Chiron is transiting through your third house. So, for the long haul kind of thing. And that's healing your identity in relation to your immediate environment. So that the situations, people, in your immediate environment, your communications, the messages exchanged back and forth, your style of communication, siblings, cousins, peers, short distance, travel and commutes. And so that is where Chiron is for you. But as Chiron retrogrades, it's revisiting ground that's already been covered in relation to those third house matters. So there are familiar things coming up that you may have gone, I thought we dealt with this. I thought this was all healed, right? I thought all of this was dealt with, but it's not. It's time to sort of take it to the next level, to take it down to the next layer, to revisit, to do the mock-up operation in that area of the chart for you. And it doesn't have to happen overnight. This is there for a while. Chiron won't leave this area of the chart until April 2020. So this is a longer term transit for you, Aquarius. And for all of us, right? Whatever area of the chart it's in. And so that's for you. And we're going to move on to Pisces now, where we have Mercury retrograding initially through your 6th house and then your 5th house. And Chiron in the 2nd. So Mercury retrograding through the 6th house, Pisces, is a review, a reflection, a reconsideration, a revisiting of communications, ideas, thoughts, perceptions. This is like, moving between like short distance travel, like mobility, right? Mercury rules that. And this has to do with your daily grind, your health and wellness routines, the tasks that you do on the day-to-day, whether they be paid or unpaid, and your self-development. And so themes that have already come up in the past are being revisited now. And they're being revisited to make sure that, everything's taken care of there and been considered, and that your all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, kind of thing. And then it will move on to the 5th house around July 19th, 20th. Move back into there where, again, you're being asked to review, reflect on, revisit, recalibrate 5th house matters that have to do with children, whether they be yours or children you're associated with, your inner child, your individual creative projects and self-expression, your what sparks joy for you. So it'll be time to revisit, to slow down in that area, to reflect in that area, right? And so that Mercury transit happens over the next kind of month or so, and then a longer term transit of Chiron in the 2nd house, Chiron and Aries in the 2nd house, is there for many more years still, but and that is healing your identity, right? Chiron and Aries in relation to 2nd house, which has to do with your resources, your personal resources, the money you make from your skills and talents, the job you do, the work you do. And it also has to do with our other resources, right? Our time and money and energy that we put out there. And it has to do with our worth and our values and our self-worth and our material possessions. And so Chiron is there in Aries on a mission to heal your identity in relation to those things, to those themes. But as it's retrograding, it is revisiting familiar ground, and saying, okay, where do we have to go back and do a little bit more, cleaning, clearing out, healing. What did we forget to take care of back there? And so that's what Chiron is doing for you over these next many months into really the spring of 2020. And so, it's not an overnight process. It's something that's happening over the longer term, but it's definitely something that it's time to reflect on, Pisces. Okay, we're going to move on to Aries now, where we have Mercury retrograding through your fifth house initially, and then your fourth, and then Chiron in your sign, right, in the first house. And so Mercury retrograding through the fifth initially until around July 19th, 20th is calling your attention, is asking you to review, to revisit, to revise, to recalibrate, reflect on your relationship to children in your life, to your inner child, to your individual creative projects and self-expression, to what sparks joy for you. And so, this has to do with mercurial themes there, ideas, communications, thoughts, perceptions, even short sort of travel. And then Mercury will move back into your fourth house, where this review and reflection is being asked of you in relation to home, family, your place of living, your ancestry, your roots, the women in your life, mothering, those kinds of themes, right? Your emotional security. And so Mercury retrograde there saying slow down, reflect. You may be revisiting themes that have come up in this area already in the past, and it's time to reflect and review and reconsider. And then Chiron in your first house, Aries, this is all about healing the self, literally, your identity, literally, right? Who you are out in the world, how you present yourself, your physical vitality, your physical appearance, your instinctual approach to the world. This is all first house. And so Chiron's there for the long haul, but as it retrogrades between like sort of the 8th and then won't move out of this territory until spring of 2020. So it's a longer term transit, but it will bring up themes that have come up already in the past, but asking for your attention again to move to the next level, to take it down to the next layer of healing, right? Of maybe things that you thought you dealt with that resurface because they're not healed, even though maybe you thought they were. So that's what's going on for you, Aries. And we're going to move on to Taurus now, where we have Mercury retrograding through your fourth and then your third houses, and then Chiron in the 12th. So Taurus, Mercury is initially retrograding through the fourth house of home and family and mothers and mothering and nurturing and the women in your life and your roots and your ancestry and your place of living, your emotional security. So things from the past are coming up now for you to review, to reconsider, to reflect on. And just in general, you're being asked to slow down in this area and go over things with a fine-tooth comb here and not rush into anything, but to review where you're at and where, you've come from in this area. And then later in July, around the 19th, 20th, Mercury will retrograde into the third house of your immediate environment, of your peers, siblings, cousins, neighbors, short distance travel, your communications, messages exchanged back and forth, that kind of thing. Early learning as well, elementary, high school kind of level learning. And so these themes are being asked to be revisited for you. Where do you need to kind of take a closer look? Where do you need to take a step back? Where do you need to rethink these things, revisit them, review them? And then Chiron is moving through your 12th house for the long haul and healing your identity in relation to your spiritual life, to your unconscious, to patterns and behaviors, even to the way you may sabotage yourself, to your how you spend time in solitude and reflection and rest and recuperation, to issues surrounding institutions such as hospitals and ashrams and spiritual retreat centers and prisons, rehabilitation facilities, these kinds of things. And so Chiron there is revisiting some themes that have already come up for you, and perhaps that you thought you had dealt with and had healed, but Chiron is saying we have unfinished business there, and we need to go back and do the mop-up operations and really, clean out what still remains in that area. And that's a longer term, going on until spring of 2020. So, don't panic. It doesn't have to happen overnight, but these are themes that will play out for you in that 12th house area, Taurus. Moving on to Gemini now, we have Mercury retrograding through your 3rd and then your 2nd houses, and then Chiron in the 11th. So Gemini, Mercury retrograding through the 3rd, right? Mercury is your ruler, and the 3rd house is where you're at home. Essentially, this is like, Gemini, slow down. We know Gemini has a very quick mind, right? And there's a lot of sort of mental spinning that can go on with Gemini, and just really, Gemini likes to change direction often and quickly, and is very curious. And, so it's a time where Mercury retrograde is saying, slow down these things, take a step back, reflect, review, reconsider your communication style, your thoughts, your perceptions, your ideas, your self-talk. These things are up for review right now. And then your 2nd house around July 19th, 20th will be activated for a time. And that has to do with your personal resources, money, your time, your energy, your values, your self-worth, these kinds of things. And so Mercury is asking you to reflect and review and revisit and revise that area of life. And then Chiron is retrograding through your 11th house of friendships and organizations and groups, associations, networks, and your hopes and dreams for the future and the people that can help you with that, right? So Chiron is healing your identity in relation to those things over the long haul, but as it retrogrades until spring of 2020, it's really saying to you, well, it's retrograding till December, but then it's still covering the same ground until spring of 2020. So it's saying to you, you've got some unfinished business. Some things that have been brought up in the past are getting stirred up again for you to take it down to the next layer, for you to heal the next level. Maybe things that you thought you had dealt with that, the universe is going, not quite done with this yet. So that's what's going on for you there, Gemini. And I'm going to move on to Cancer now, last but not least in this case. Cancer, you have Mercury retrograding through your 2nd house and then your 1st house, and then Chiron in the 10th. So Mercury retrograding through the 2nd is bringing up themes of resources, of, money, valuables, time, energy, material possessions, your values, your self-worth, these kinds of things, asking you to revisit, to revise, to reflect, to review, to cross the T's and dot the I's there. And then moving into the house of the self, the 1st house, your physical vitality, your physical appearance, your instinctual approach to the world. Themes that have come up in the past are going to be revisited during a Mercury retrograde for your reconsideration and your review and your reflection. Okay, so that's the Mercury retrograde, Cancer. And then the Chiron retrograde is in your 10th house, right? So Chiron's transiting your 10th house for the long haul. Healing your identity in relation to your public persona, your public reputation, your worldly ambitions and aspirations, your career, the public legacy you wish to leave, your relationship to authority and the father. And so themes that have already come up for you in the past are being revisited now and saying, okay, we've got another layer of healing here that needs to happen. And maybe you thought you dealt with these things, but maybe you there's still some business to take care of before moving on and out of this area of the chart for you. And so it's like, some old wounding may come up, but it's nothing that's not familiar to you already. It's just that it's coming up again to say, are you really done with this? What else can we do to really, really clean out this wound and really help it heal to the best that it possibly can, right? In that 10th house area. And so that's for your consideration, Cancer. And I'm going to leave it there. This has gone quite long for part 2. But I hope that this gives you some insight into where some areas of review and reflection, are coming up for you over the next little while for each of you. And I will see you next week when we will speak to the lunar eclipse in Capricorn that is happening mid-month. Okay, so take good care and I'll talk soon. Bye-bye.